Good morning, everyone. I'm Nancy Farkas, President of the Dayton Board of Realtors, and I'd like to thank all of you today for attending, including our Dayton Board of Realtors board. So thank you all very much for coming today. We at the Dayton Board, along with the National Association of Realtors, support Senator Brown's initiative to expedite the short sale process through his Prompt Notification of Short Sale Act. We, at this time, really are in full support of it because we believe the short sale process is really a very difficult process for homeowners, sellers, buyers, and the community, and we hope to change that through his initiative. At this time, I'd like to introduce Mark Koppman, our President-elect, who'll talk further about the process.
Thank you, Nancy. A short sale generally costs the lender less than what a foreclosure does. Therefore, realtors believe that it can be a viable way for a lender to minimize its losses. We as realtors are continually astonished by the number of short sales that servicers allowed to dissolve due to time involved and due to the fact that they do not understand actual local values. Unfortunately, this circumstance usually results in a potential home buyer canceling this purchase contract and the purchaser property heading into foreclosure anyway. The higher rate of foreclosures leaves a vacant, unattended home in many of our communities. This results in a rash of vandalism, further reduces the property values of others, and many of our agents refuse to enter into this short sale process simply because of the time taken to get this transaction completed in a diminished rate of return on commission for time involved. Enormous amounts of time are spent on potential short sales that result in actual foreclosures. Even if successful, the process still takes many months and countless hours and requires remarketing of the property in many cases many times before the process is completed. Buyers lose patience and terminate contracts on a regular basis. Establishing a time frame for responding to potential buyer offers will help streamline the short sale process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. We wish to thank Senator Brown for his diligent work in helping alleviate the serious problem within the housing sector, and we look forward to working with him to help alleviate this, to help legislate this housing act. Now, at this time, I would like to introduce Senator Sherrod Brown. Thank you.
Nancy, thank you. And Nancy was in my office a year ago, when was it? Yeah. Something like that, and helped to sort of explain and educate me and others about why this is a problem and continues to be a problem. I mean, the public's doesn't think a lot about what does short sales mean and how do people get in this situation when you've got a buyer and a seller. If you have a buyer and a seller and they have good credit, there shouldn't be a problem, but there is a problem far too often. We know a couple of things about our economy. We know that when we're in recession and we come out of recession, two things usually happen. Manufacturing picks up. I was just at Harco Manufacturing a few minutes ago, which I came from there, a company I've worked with that supplies the auto industry. They've done okay. It's tough, but manufacturing's picking up. The other way out of recession is housing, and we know that housing is not picking up in the Miami Valley or really everywhere the way we need it to. And one of the small parts of that is what we want to see happen with short sales. That Barbara, I know, has been the realtor for Nick and Ellie. I'll introduce in a second. But you know, when you have a willing buyer and a willing seller, and the bank takes week after week, month after month, the buyer more often than not is going to walk away because that buyer needs a place to live, and the seller is really at sort of wit's end what to do in a situation like that. Senator Murkowski, Lisa Murkowski, a senator, Republican senator from Alaska, and I are banding together, working together to work with the National Association of Realtors and with realtors in Dayton and around the country, and with prospective buyers to fix this in a way to put some time limits on these banks. I was talking with a group of bankers came to see me in Washington last week, and I was talking to a community banker who said, I can typically turn this around. I can often turn a short sale around in less than a month, because often they hadn't sold the mortgage. They know their clients, they know their communities, and they can move quickly on it. It's these big bureaucratic institutions that probably don't have enough people, their profits notwithstanding, don't have enough people working in, kind of going through when this mortgage was sold. It was sliced and diced into derivatives and all this sort of complex financial instruments, and they're not able to trace as quickly as they should where this mortgage is and what they need to do. And that's why putting this time limit, I don't want government to have to be involved in this, but I also want government to be on the side of the buyer, the seller, and the realtor, which is what we can do with this legislation. So I appreciate all of you in stepping up in a way that has really mattered here. Our legislation is the Prompt Notification of Short Sale Act. It will, first of all, achieve it will say you've got to communicate. So when the buyer and the seller they need a counteroffer, or they need some discussion and some answer. That's the first thing that will happen. It will help bring more certainty and assurance for home buyers by giving them a final date by which they can close the transaction, and ultimately it boosts the economy, because the more sales you have, it's good for realtors' bottom lines, it's good for the community, because these houses don't end up vacant, they don't end up foreclosed on, they don't end up being a burden in a neighborhood. And you've all, because you've sold real estate in Huber Heights and Dayton and Kettering and Springfield and all over this area, you know what happens when there's an abandoned house and it's not usually kept up very well by the bank or whoever ends up owning it. And you know what happens 3 houses down the street and across the street, and the blight on the neighborhood and the property values of everybody declines. And the Miami Valley's been afflicted with that far too many times. And that's why anything we can do just to get this communication going and to get the buyers and sellers talking to each other is so very, very important. So it's my pleasure. Nick and Ellie Guzman have the story to explain this better than I can, frankly. They have been through a process over about a 2.5-year period, something like that. And Barbara was their realtor, Barbara Waddell, as she had said, and they'll tell their story. And after I think Nick is going to speak. After Nick speaks, Brett Domasick, who is the owner of Domasick and Associates, will also tell his story. But we'll start with Nick. Thank you for being here. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator Brown. My name is Nick Guzman. This is my wife, Ellie. Start off, I'd like to acknowledge Barbara Waddell for her work that she did to help us get through this process. If not for Barbara, I think we would have gave up a long time ago. Give you a little bit of highlight on this. We started initially trying to save the house back in 2008 when everything started to go downhill. I lost my job. I worked for Moraine GM and got laid off. We tried to do the Obama Affordable Home program. We did all the paperwork and everything. We went through Bank of America, who was our financer at the time, and they kept giving us the runaround. They finally, after about a year and a half of trying to work with them, given the paperwork, every paperwork they wanted, we gave them everything. After about a year and a half, they finally said that the only way that they'll really help us if we go into default. We had to go into foreclosure. So I told them, so you want me to ruin my credit before you'll help me? They said, that's the only way we can do it. So we kept paying for the house, even though the money, I had a job, we were working paycheck to paycheck, or living paycheck to paycheck. We kept the house during that time. We were lucky enough to get a job offer, and we actually moved out of the state for 2 years. We moved down to Texas. I got a job offer down there working with the oil companies. So we put the house up for sale. And with the Bank of America, every time we'd have a buyer come up, for the house, because we weren't in foreclosure yet, they kept putting off the time for paperwork or starting any kind of process. And Barbara was with us during this whole time. She started actually going into it when we put the house up for sale. That's when she joined up with me and Ellie. And the house was up for sale for a year, and we lost 5 buyers in that time frame because of Bank of America not following up. So then Barbara suggested that we go to do a short sale, where we would take a loss. We owed $144,000 on the house. They went and appraised the house at $110,000. The house finally sold at the short sale for $96,000. But during the process of the short sale, okay, every time Bank of America, we never had no personal contact with anybody. There was no specific name given of who we would contact every time. Barbara was mainly our contact, and she would be contacting Bank of America. They would come back and say, okay, we need these paperwork. They say, and they would give us a deadline. They say, well, we need this within 5 days. If you don't have it within 5 days, you have to start the process all over again. Okay? One of the problems we ran into, and this is because I was divorced. Ellie's my second wife. And the problem we ran into is my first wife, her name is Margaret. Ellie's real name is Margaret, but we call her Ellie. They couldn't differentiate between the two Margarets. They couldn't figure out that Margaret, I told them, can't you believe that there's Margarets throughout the world that might happen to have the same name? But anyway, that was one of the problems we ran into, is having paperwork. They would call up and say, okay, or not call, they contact Barbara and say, we need this paperwork right now. Make sure you give us pay statements, 2 months pay statements every time. And by the time they got the pay statements and got back to us, the month had already passed by. Yeah. So we were back. Well, this is past. The statement is no good. It's old. We need a new one. So they kept coming up with all these excuses. Okay, as we go along, then they come up and they say that they need a HUD report, HUD approval form, and they sent that to us. We had to sign it, send it back to them. Again, we had a deadline. Every deadline they gave me, I met it. I responded to them within 48 hours. So they never had an excuse of me being late to returning their response. Okay, my wife ended up calling we finally got a contact person, Penny Hunter from Bank of America. My wife called the number that was given to us. When we called, we got an answering service, and they said that we can leave a message for Penny, or we can call her boss in charge and leave a message to them. So my wife called both numbers. She threatened them and saying that we're going to get a lawyer. We're going to go and file a suit against them because they're not responding back in a timely manner. My wife also did a video, and she sent it to Dr. Phil, because at that time there was a show going on about short sales and stuff like that. So we sent a copy of it to Dr. Phil. My wife told them that we're going to contact Dr. Phil. Well, of course, right away we get phone calls coming back. Part of the short sale, the deal was, when we were doing the short sale, that when the house was sold, we would get $1,000 out of the deal. I'm not familiar with why that was, but that was what brought up to us. They came back a week later and said, oh, we can't give you $1,000. You can apply it to the closing costs of your home. You can apply that. We can't give you the cash. And also you need to pay another $2,500 on top of that for closing. So they came up with more funds. They said, if you don't answer us back or come with the money back within a certain time frame, you have to start from scratch all over again. So, of course, we got the cash up. I was working. I had a good job. We got the cash, and we sent the check out. They got their money. We ended up doing the closing, but the closing was actually pushed back almost 2 weeks from the original date because they needed more paperwork. I can't remember all the papers that were involved, but there's so much paperwork involved, and they come up with any excuse of why, and they also always threaten you with the penalty. If you don't meet us with this time frame, start from fresh. Every time they sent something out, they gave us a threat of that type, a penalty. If you can't meet us with the time frame, you have to start from scratch. We finally did the closing on May 25th of last year. 2 days after the closing, they sent us more papers and said that you have to sign these papers and get it back to us, or the closing is null and void. We had so much runarounds. These are some of the places they told us to go to. When we talk, every time we call, we talk to someone else different. Making home affordable, that was one place. Default prevention department. Home retention department. Every time we called, somebody would refer us to a different place. BOA Department of Files. The Hope Team. FHA Fixed Modification Department. Loan Modification Division. Home Loan Servicing Care of Underwriters. And then they finally said BOA Escalation Department, and then Short Sales Department was the last thing they told us after all these other departments. And it took them, like I say, from the time we started the short sale, I would say probably about, the actual short sale period was around 9 months. From the start to when we finally did close on the house, and it was free and clear. Thank you.
All I have to say about short sales is there's nothing short about it. Nothing short about it, as you have just learned in the story that you just heard from Nick and Ellie. I have a story similar to that. I'm not going to bore you with that, except that, Senator Brown, I think the one thing that you could probably take back to these people to whom you deal with is communication is the key. And if we can find a better communication path with the lenders, it would certainly help. Many of us agents that have worked short sales, many of you out there and those that are in the field today, I find that is the biggest problem that we have, because much like Nick and Ellie said, no longer or no sooner do you get them the information that they need, that time frame is dead, then they want it over again. And you have to continually repeat that process over and over again to get them to finally take the file and start working with that file. It just drives you nuts. As an agent, you're doing your best that you can possibly do for your client to try to get this house put together and closed. And it allows you an opportunity. The one thing, nice thing about a short sale is it allows you to essentially set a price. You set the price where you want it. It matters not to the seller. They just want out from underneath it. They're not going to net anything on this sale. So you can put a price on this transaction that will possibly sell it. And that's the nice thing about the short sale from an agent's perspective. So you get that opportunity. Thank you very much. It's a very difficult task. I personally enjoy working on them if I can get them, if I know I can get them through. And the success rate, we just want to improve that as agents. We want to improve the short sale success rate for sellers so that we can get these transactions through and get these people, get rid of the property for them, give someone else an opportunity. Thank you very much.